In the misty dawn of June 6, 1944, as the Allied forces stormed the beaches of Normandy, a young Canadian artilleryman named Sergeant Thomas Tommy Harper gripped the lanyard of his 25-pounder gun with sweaty palms. The roar of the sea mixed with the thunder of naval guns, but Tommy's mind was focused on the task ahead. He was part of the Royal Canadian Artillery, attached to the 3rd Canadian Infantry Division, landing on Juno Beach. The 25-pounder, that reliable British-designed field gun howitzer, had been the backbone of Commonwealth artillery since the early days of the war. But on this day, and in the weeks to follow, it would be called upon for something far beyond its usual role of lobbing shells over hills and into enemy positions from miles away. Tommy, a farm boy from Saskatchewan, had enlisted in 1940 at the age of 20. He remembered the stories his grandfather told about the Great War, where Canadian gunners had earned a reputation for precision and bravery. Now here he was in the thick of another world war, crewing a gun that fired 25-pound shells with deadly accuracy. The 25-pounder was versatile, able to act as both a gun for flat trajectory fire and a howitzer for high-angle bombardment. It could traverse 360 degrees on its unique platform, a feature that would prove crucial in the unusual events to come. But for now, as the landing craft hit the sand, Tommy and his crew hauled their gun ashore amidst chaos, dodging machine gun fire and explosions. The Canadians pushed inland, securing their objectives faster than their American and British counterparts on other beaches. By evening, they had linked up with forces from Gold Beach, but the real fight was just beginning. The Germans, caught off guard but resilient, launched counterattacks with their feared panzer divisions. Tommy's battery, the 14th Field Regiment, set up in a hasty position near Courseulles-sur-Mer. They fired barges to support the infantry, the gun's muzzle flash lighting up the twilight like fireworks on Dominion Day back home. As the days turned into a grueling stalemate around Cannes, the Canadians faced fierce resistance. The 12th SS Panzer Division, Hitler-Jugend, fanatical young soldiers equipped with Panther and Tiger tanks, probed the Allied lines relentlessly. Tommy's crew, consisting of him as the gun layer, Corporal Eddie Leclerc from Quebec on ammunition, Private Jack O'Malley from Ontario as loader, and Lieutenant Robert Bob Mackenzie from Nova Scotia commanding, became a tight-knit family. They shared stories during lulls, Eddie about his family's maple syrup farm, Jack about hockey games in Toronto, and Bob about fishing off the Atlantic coast. These tales kept their spirits high, reminding them of the Canada they were fighting for. One evening in mid-June, as the sun dipped low over the Norman hedgerows, intelligence reports filtered in. A German armored column was advancing toward their position. The infantry was stretched thin, and anti-tank guns were scarce. Lieutenant Mackenzie gathered his men. "Boys, we've got panzers coming. Our 6-pounders are out of action, but we've got the 25-pounders. We'll have to use them in direct fire, straight at the bastards like in the desert campaigns." Tommy's heart raced. Direct fire? The 25-pounder was meant for indirect support, not dueling tanks face-to-face. But in the North African theater, British gunners had done just that, knocking out Italian and German armor with armor-piercing shells. Now, it was the Canadians' turn to improvise. They repositioned the gun behind a low stone wall, camouflaging it with branches and nets. The crew loaded AP rounds, armor-piercing projectiles designed to punch through tank hulls. The 25-pounder's muzzle velocity of over 1,700 feet per second gave it a fighting chance against medium tanks, though against the Tiger's thick armor, it would need a lucky hit on the tracks or sides. As dusk fell, the rumble of engines grew louder. Tommy peered through the sights, his breath steady despite the adrenaline. "Range 800 yards, Bob whispered. The first Panther emerged from the bocage, its long 75mm gun scanning for targets. "Fire," Bob commanded. Tommy yanked the lanyard. The gun bucked, sending a shell screaming toward the lead tank. It struck the turret with a clang, but glanced off. The Panther swiveled its gun toward them. "Reload," Eddie shouted, slamming another round in. Jack rammed it home. Tommy adjusted aim slightly lower. Boom! This time, the shell hit the track, shredding it and immobilizing the beast. The crew cheered briefly, but more tanks followed. Machine gun fire raked their position, forcing them to duck. A nearby gun from another crew erupted in flame as a German shell found its mark. Through the night, Tommy's battery held the line, firing over open sights in a role the 25-pounder wasn't primarily designed for. It was unusual, risky, exposing the gun and crew to direct enemy fire instead of safely bombarding from afar. But necessity bred innovation. The Canadians' artillery doctrine emphasized flexibility, and here it's shown. By dawn, the German attack faltered, with several tanks disabled or destroyed. Tommy wiped sweat from his brow, his ears ringing. They had bought time for reinforcements, but the cost was high. 2 crew members from another gun lay wounded. As the campaign dragged on, the unusual use of the 25-pounder became a legend among the troops. In the push toward Caen, during Operation Charnwood in early July, Canadian gunners again employed direct fire to support the infantry against dug-in positions and armored counterattacks. Tommy's crew was in the thick of it, their gun barking defiance. One particularly harrowing moment came when a Tiger tank, that monstrous 56-ton behemoth, lumbered into view at 500 yards. Its 88mm gun could obliterate them in an instant. AP round, aim for the turret ring, Bob ordered. Tommy sighted carefully, accounting for the slight breeze. The shell flew true, jamming the turret and forcing the crew to bail out under machine gun fire from supporting infantry. These actions highlighted Canada's contribution to the Allied effort. While the Americans had their 105mm howitzers and the British their own artillery, the Canadians' adept use of the 25-pounder in dual roles showcased their ingenuity. Back home, in towns like Winnipeg and Vancouver, families tuned into radio broadcasts, hearing tales of their boys' heroism. For the 60-plus generation today, these stories evoke memories of uncles, fathers, and friends who served, reminding us of the sacrifices that secured our freedoms. But the story was far from over. As the Allies broke out from Normandy in August, during Operation Totalize, the Canadians led the charge toward Falaise. Tommy's battery advanced with the armor, but intelligence warned of a massive German counterattack led by Michael Wittmann, the infamous Tiger Ace. The stage was set for an even more extraordinary use of the 25-pounder, one that would test the limits of man and machine. By the second week of August 1944, the Normandy battlefield had become a cauldron. The Germans were trying to escape the closing Falaise Pocket, and every road, every orchard, every Norman lane was choked with retreating columns. Trucks, half-tracks, horse-drawn wagons, and the dreaded Tigers and Panthers trying to muscle their way west. The Royal Canadian Artillery had pushed forward so fast that Tommy Harper's 14th Field Regiment was now miles ahead of where any artillery was supposed to be. Fuel and ammunition came up on whatever trucks could get through, and the guns often fired until the barrels glowed cherry red. On the morning of August 14th, Lieutenant Bob Mackenzie received an urgent call from the 4th Canadian Armored Division. A mixed battle group of the 12th SS and the 101st Heavy Panzer Battalion, rumored to include Michael Wittmann himself, was massing near Synthos for a last-ditch breakout. The Canadian tanks, mostly Shermans and Fireflies, were low on fuel and ammunition after days of continuous fighting. The infantry were exhausted. The only thing between the Germans and a clean escape route was a thin screen of Polish and Canadian armor, and the 25-pounders of the 14th Regiment. Mackenzie was told, in no uncertain terms, "You will hold the high ground at point 140 at all costs. Use whatever means necessary." That was the moment the 25-pounder stopped being just an artillery piece and became something the designers in Woolwich had never imagined. The crews dug their guns in on the forward slope of a low ridge. Wheels locked, trails spread, platforms dropped into the chalky soil. They stripped the camouflage nets off completely. There was no point hiding anymore. Every gun was loaded with solid armor-piercing shot, the same rounds that had worked miracles in the desert when the 8th Army ran out of anti-tank guns. Range cards were useless now. They were fighting like Napoleonic cannon at point-blank range. Tommy Harper's gun, number 3 of B Troop, was positioned on the left flank beside a knocked-out Sherman. The crew worked in shirt sleeves despite the August heat because the recoil blast would have torn any tunic to shreds. Eddie Leclerc stacked AP rounds like cordwood. Jack O'Malley, the big loader from Toronto, had stripped to the waist, muscles gleaming with sweat. They knew what was coming. At 11:17, the first Tigers appeared out of the haze, 5 of them in a wedge, Whitman's personal pennant visible on the lead tank. The range was under 1,000 yards and closing fast. The Canadian Fireflies opened up first, but the 17-pounders were few, and the Tigers shrugged off the hits on their frontal armor. Then the 25-pounders spoke. The sound was different from normal indirect fire. No long, lazy whistle of high explosive, just a flat, vicious crack as the solid shot left the barrel at nearly 2,000 feet per second. Tommy saw his first round strike the glassy plate of the second Tiger and ricochet skyward in a shower of sparks. He traversed left 2 mils, depressed the barrel a fraction, and fired again. This time the shot caught the Tiger just above the driver's visor. There was no dramatic Hollywood explosion, just a sudden gout of flame from the hatches as the crew bailed out, some on fire. All along the ridge, the guns roared. The 25-pounders were firing so fast that the breech blocks glowed dull red, and the gunners had to piss on the recoil buffers to keep them from seizing. Empty brass cartridge cases piled up knee-deep behind each gun. The Germans, expecting only machine gun and small arms fire from the ridge, were stunned. Their lead Tigers tried to turn away, but the ground was soft, and they bellied. One by one they were hit, tracks blown off, turrets jammed, vision slit-shattered. Whitman's own tank took a direct hit through the thinner rear armor as he tried to reverse. The Tiger brewed up instantly, a pillar of black smoke marking the end of the most feared tank ace in France. By the time the German attack faltered, 8 Tigers and 11 Panthers lay burning or abandoned along the base of Point 140. The Canadians had lost 3 guns destroyed and 9 crew killed, but the line held. A British war correspondent watching through binoculars was heard to mutter, "My God, they're using field artillery as anti-tank guns, and winning." Word spread like wildfire through the Allied armies. The phrase 25-pounder ambush entered the lexicon overnight. Montgomery himself sent a signal to the Canadian Corps, "Magnificent work by your gunners." The road to Falaise is open because of them. Back in Canada, the CBC interrupted regular programming to read the communiqué, and old veterans of Vimy and Passchendaele raised a glass in Legion halls from Cape Breton to Victoria. But Tommy Harper and his mates had no time to celebrate. The very next day, August 15th, they were ordered forward again, this time in direct support of the South Saskatchewan Regiment and the Lake Superior Regiment as they closed the pocket. The guns were now mounted on their limbers and towed behind Bren carriers, leaping forward in bounds, unlimbering, firing a dozen rounds, then racing on before the German 88s could range in. It was artillery tactics turned inside out, mobile, aggressive, almost reckless. Near the village of Souligny on the 18th, Tommy's troop performed what many still consider the single most audacious action ever carried out by Commonwealth field artillery. A column of 30 German vehicles, half-tracks, trucks, and 4 self-propelled assault guns was spotted trying to slip through a narrow lane bordered by high stone walls. There was no time to call in typhoons, no tanks within miles. Lieutenant Mackenzie made the decision in seconds. We'll block the lane with the guns themselves. The 425-pounders were driven at full speed straight onto the road. Wheels locked, trails dropped across the lane like a barricade. The crews stood to their guns in the open, less than 400 yards from the oncoming Germans. The first assault gun, a Stoogie 3, opened fire and killed Jack O'Malley instantly with its first shot. Eddie Leclerc, screaming in French and English mixed, kept feeding rounds as fast as the breech would close. Tommy fired 10 rounds in under a minute, every one a hit. The lead Stoogie exploded, blocking the lane completely. The following vehicles tried to reverse, but were trapped by their own length. Within 5 minutes, the entire column was a shambles. Burning vehicles, dead horses, scattered infantry trying to surrender. When Canadian infantry arrived 20 minutes later, they found 4 25-pounders still in position, barrels smoking, surrounded by empty cases and the bodies of friend and foe alike. Eddie Leclerc was sitting on the trail of Tommy's gun, a flesh wound in his arm, calmly smoking a captured German cigarette. "We stopped the buggers at Tommy," he said. Tommy could only nod, too exhausted to speak. That action earned the 14th Regiment a battlefield mention in dispatches and Lieutenant Mackenzie the Military Cross. But for the gunners themselves, it was simply another day when the 25-pounder had to be something it was never meant to be. Yet the most extraordinary chapter was still to come, one that no history book has ever fully told, because the men who lived it swore among themselves never to speak of it until every one of them had passed. It happened 3 nights later, in the moonlit ruins of a chateau outside Potigny, when the 25-pounder was asked to do the one thing everyone believed was impossible. Night of August 21st, 1944. The Falaise Pocket had shrunk to a strip of hell barely 10 miles wide. Inside it, the remnants of 2 German armies, over 100,000 men, hundreds of tanks, thousands of vehicles, were being crushed by artillery and air attack from every side. The roads were clogged with burning trucks and the bodies of horses. The air stank of diesel, cordite, and death. Tommy Harper's battery had been ordered to a shattered chateau on the high ground south of Potigny. Only 3 guns were still mobile. The 4th had thrown a track that afternoon and had to be abandoned. Ammunition was down to 30 rounds per gun, all high explosive. The crews were on their last legs, 4 days without proper sleep, living on Benzedrine and Compote. Lieutenant Mackenzie's face was black with cordite stains and exhaustion, but his voice was steady when the order came over the radio from brigade. "Enemy infantry and armor attempting breakout on your exact position. Estimated strength 1 battalion Kampfgruppe, plus 6 Tiger tanks of Schwerpanzer Abteilung 102. No friendly armor can reach you before dawn. You are to deny the road at all costs. Acknowledge." Mackenzie looked at the 3 guns, at the 12 men left alive in the troop, and at the moonlit killing ground below the chateau. Then he did something no artillery officer in the British or Commonwealth armies had ever been recorded doing. He ordered the 25-pounders to fire with open breeches and reduced charges, straight from the barrel like giant shotguns, using case shot. Case shot. Canister. The anti-personnel round that had last been used in earnest at Waterloo. A thin metal canister filled with 360 lead balls, designed to burst just in front of the muzzle and turn the gun into a 25-pound sawed-off shotgun. It had an effective range of about 300 yards and had been carried in the limbers since 1939 more as a curiosity than anything else. No one had ever fired it in anger in this war. Until tonight, the gunners ripped open the ancient wooden boxes marked case shot for use against mass infantry attack only. The canisters were green with age, but the lead balls inside rattled like hailstones. Eddie Leclerc laughed, an edge of hysteria in it, and said, "Mon Dieu, we're bringing back the Duke of Wellington." They laid the guns wheel to wheel across the narrow road, muzzles almost touching, barrels depressed to nearly flat trajectory. Charge 1 only, barely enough powder to reach the end of the orchard. The crews stood in the open, no cover, because there was no time and nowhere to hide. Tommy's gun was in the center. He personally loaded the first canister, the brass cartridge case cold and greasy in his hands. At 2:14, the first wave of German infantry appeared, ghostly figures in the moonlight, some still wearing their camouflage smocks, others stripped to shirts, all running for their lives toward the Canadian lines. Behind them, the unmistakable clanking of Tiger tanks, 6 of them, trying to force the pace. Mackenzie did not wait. Rapid fire. Fire. 12 pounds of powder in each gun. 3 guns. 36 pounds of propellant detonating almost simultaneously. The night turned white. The recoil slammed the trails 6 inches into the earth. 360 lead balls per gun left the muzzles at 1,200 feet per second, spreading in a roaring cone of death. The effect, at 250 yards, was apocalyptic. The front rank of German infantry simply ceased to exist. Men were cut in half, thrown backward, shredded. The second rank tried to stop and bring weapons up, but the guns were already reloaded. Eddie, and the others working like madmen. Second salvo. Third. The air filled with a continuous ripping roar, like a giant tearing canvas. Empty cartridge cases flew over the gunners' shoulders in glowing arcs. The German officers tried to rally their men, screaming, waving pistols. A Tiger fired its main gun. The shell passed between two 25-pounders and exploded harmlessly in the chateau, ruins behind. Then the Tigers were among the infantry, trying to push through the carnage, holes slick with blood. At 150 yards, Mackenzie switched to high explosive with supercharge and zero fuse. Airburst set to detonate the instant the shell left the barrel. The 25-pounders became flamethrowers of shrapnel. One Tiger took 3 direct hits on its open commander's hatch. The commander disappeared in red mist. Another lost a track to a lucky shot and slewed sideways, crushing its own infantry. The remaining 4 tried to reverse, but the road behind was blocked by burning half-tracks and dying men. Canadian infantry, the Argyll and Sutherland Highlanders of Canada, who had been written off as overrun, suddenly rose from the ditches on the flanks and poured rifle and Bren gun fire into the chaos. It lasted 8 minutes. When the smoke cleared and the moon came out again, the road was a charnel house. 4 Tigers burned. 1 stood slewed across the verge, turret blown off. The 6th had escaped back into the pocket. Of the German infantry battalion, fewer than 40 men reached the Canadian lines to surrender, hands high, faces blank with shock. Tommy Harper stood beside his gun, ears ringing so badly he could not hear his own heartbeat. The barrel of his 25-pounder was scorched black, the muzzle swollen from the heat. Around the guns lay a carpet of broken bodies and spent lead balls that glittered in the moonlight like frost. Lieutenant Mackenzie walked the line, checking his men. Jack O'Malley was gone, but the rest were alive. Eddie Leclerc was vomiting quietly behind the wheel of the quad. No one spoke for a long time. At first light, a liaison officer from 1st Polish Armored Division arrived in a jeep, stared at the carnage, and asked in French who had held the road. When told it was 3 Canadian 25-pounders firing canister and point-blank he crossed himself and said simply, "Murd." The official war diary of the 14th Field Regiment RCA contains only one terse line about the night action south of Potigny. Troop engaged enemy infantry and tanks at close quarters. Road held. Nothing more. The men themselves never spoke of it again, not to war correspondents, not to historians, not even to their wives. They had done what had to be done, and some things are too raw to be turned into stories over beer in the Legion. Tommy Harper came home to Saskatchewan in December 1945. He farmed the same quarter section his grandfather had broken with oxen, married a girl from Regina, raised 3 sons who never knew their father, had once turned an artillery piece into the Grim Reaper incarnate. Eddie Leclerc went back to the sugar bush in Quebec and never touched hard liquor again. Bob Mackenzie became a schoolteacher in Halifax and kept a single brass 25-pounder cartridge case on his desk. When students asked what it was, he only smiled and changed the subject. The 25-pounder itself, QF-25 Pedar Mk2, served on with the Canadian Army until 1970, then went into reserve, then to museums and gate guardians. You can still see them at the Royal Canadian Artillery Museum in Shiloh, at CFB Gagetown, outside Legion Hall from St. John's to Esquimalt. They look quiet and dignified now, their barrels cold, their paint fresh. They will never tell you what they did on a moonlit road in Normandy when Canada needed them to be something no designer ever intended. But the old gunners know. And on Remembrance Day, when the last post sounds and the pipes play Flowers of the Forest, a few of them, fewer every year, stand a little straighter, remembering the night 3 guns and 12 half-dead men stopped an army with weapons older than their grandfathers. That, my friends, is the true story of the most unusual use of the 25-pounder in the Second World War. Lest we forget, years passed like pages in a photograph album that nobody dared open too often. Tommy Harper died in 2008, quietly, in the Regina General Hospital, at the age of 88. The nurse who closed his eyes noticed he was smiling, as though he had just heard a familiar voice call fire one last time. Eddie Leclerc followed in 2011, found sitting upright in his sugar shack north of Sherbrooke, a half-finished cigarette still burning between his fingers. Bob McKenzie made it to 2014, the last of the old troop, and when the Halifax Chronicle-Herald ran his obituary, they called him a beloved teacher and veteran of Normandy. No mention of the moonlit road, no mention of canister shot, just the way he wanted it. But stories have a way of refusing to stay buried when the right person starts digging. In 2019, a young graduate student from the University of New Brunswick, researching Canadian artillery tactics for her master's thesis, stumbled across a single line in the 14th Field Regiment's war diary that refused to make sense. 21/22, August 44. B Troop expended 27 RDS case shot in close defense of position. She knew case shot had been declared obsolete by every Commonwealth Army in 1940. She knew no official record of it ever being fired in the Second World War existed. She started asking questions. Old boxes in the Library and Archives Canada basement began to speak. There was a carbon copy of a signal from 1st Canadian Army HQ, classified until 1994, praising extraordinary initiative in the employment of obsolete ammunition. There was a private letter from a Polish liaison officer describing Canadian gunners who fought like Cossacks of the steppe. And, most damning of all, there was a small envelope sealed with wax in 1946 and marked, not to be opened until all signatories have passed. Inside were 12 signatures, the surviving members of B Troop, and a single photograph. 3 25-pounders wheel-to-wheel on a moonlit road, brass cartridge cases glittering like gold coins around them, in the background a carpet of darkness that no one needed to explain. The thesis became a book. The book became a documentary. And suddenly, 75 years after the fact, Canada learned what a handful of half-star gunners had done with weapons their own manuals called museum pieces. On November 11th, 2022, the Royal Canadian Artillery unveiled a new plaque at the Artillery Memorial in Ottawa. It is simple bronze, no bigger than a dinner plate, mounted low so old men in wheelchairs can read it without standing. To the gunners of 14th Field Regiment RCA, who, on the night of 21/22 August 1944, with 3 25-pounders and the last of their strength, held the road at Potigny, using case shot fired in anger. For the first and only time in the Second World War, they asked for no glory. We give it now, while a few of us still remember their names. That day, a 93-year-old woman from Regina, Tommy Harper's youngest daughter, laid a wreath of prairie lilies. An old man from Quebec, Eddie Leclerc's grandson, stood beside her in the uniform of the modern artillery, eyes wet. And somewhere, if you listened very carefully above the skirl of the pipes, you could almost hear the flat crack of a 25-pounder firing canister under a Normandy moon. The gun itself, Tommy's actual No. 3 gun, had been found in 2021 rusting behind a barn near Cannes, bought by a French farmer in 1947 for use as a gatepost. The Royal Regiment of Canadian Artillery paid what was asked, brought it home on a Hercules, and restored it until the breech block closed like it did in 1944. Today it stands inside the museum at CFB Shiloh, muzzle pointed forever toward the prairie sky. Beside it, in a small glass case, sits one dented, green-painted canister, the last known example in existence, and a simple card. Sometimes a weapon is only metal and wood. Sometimes it is 12 tired men who refuse to let their friends die. On one night, in August 1944, this gun was Canada. And that, my friends, is the end of the story the old gunners carried to their graves, and the beginning of the one we will carry now. Lest we forget,